Hello and welcome to another episode of the Digital Transformation Lab Disruptive Technology series. I'm delighted that we have here today Samantha G. Wolfe, but she does go by the name of Sam, and Sam is based in New York, has recently wrote a new book, Metaversed. Excellent book. If you haven't read it, please do. It is a great book. And Sam is the founder of PitchFWD. Is that how you pronounce it? PitchFWD, a strategic consultancy based, focused on the whole acceleration and adoption of emerging technologies. She's also an adjunct professor with New York University Steinhardt School, and she teaches on a number of programs, which she actually designed: business of virtual reality and augmented reality, the marketing of innovation, and avatars and virtual humans, which I've no doubt we will touch on. And then Sam also received her MBA from NYU Stern School of Business, and she's a BA from Yale University. Sam, have I missed anything?
Yeah, not really. I think that covers a lot of it. Thank you so much for having
me. Look, we're thrilled to have you here. And look, I have read your book. I really enjoyed it. I love the way you made sense of things. So it's very easy for anyone to get their arms around this. But tell us, what was the genesis for the book, and why did you write it?
Well, it was actually, so my class ends up being kind of a way that I've met a whole lot of people within the industry. I mean, I like going to conferences. Like, that's probably one of my favorite things, to go and meet and see all these new technologies. But second to that, I have had probably about 200 guests in my classes, and one of them ended up being my co-author. He reached out to me and he said, I want to write this book, and I wanted to be sort of like all the bad implications of the future of technology. And I was like, well, that's great, but that tends to not be my approach to things. I tend to be like much more positive, and then we can get to the negative, but like, let's talk about the business opportunities. And so I said, if we can talk about the business opportunities, if we can talk about all the industry applications, which I do in my classes, I have sort of like over 20 industries. And then if we go into where it could potentially go wrong, so you can prepare for it, I'm in. And we had probably, he spoke at my class for about 20 minutes, a half an hour. And I think he visited like one other time. And that's all our interactions that we had prior to going into a year of writing a book.
Wow. Okay.
So
well,
he's now turned into one of my best friends, but it was like one of those like, oh, like I tend to be, it's like if you want to do it and you're willing to work together, and we've just we really hit it off, and we actually haven't ever met in person. He's based in Portugal.
wow.
And so I met somebody last week who actually books conferences in Portugal, and she's like, I will get you both in the same room after so much time together. But it was, in general, and this is what we were talking a little bit before the recording, like I do like to make sense of emerging technologies. And I felt like there was so much out there of people at the time sort of talking about the metaverse and not using the right kind of terminology, or sort of confusing things. And I like to sort of break it down so that people can understand it, so they can apply what they do, to their own businesses, to their own goals. And I've done that sort of throughout my time in emerging tech. And so this was an opportunity to do it again in that kind of different format.
Yeah, and look, I'm a big fan of sense making myself, and I think what's really interesting in the book, because you start out and you're very deliberate in terms of you calling it out, sort of saying, look, if someone tells you what the metaverse is, they don't really know, because they're still working our way through it. But within that, you also have a couple of definitions in terms of how it might be described or shaped. How are you currently describing the metaverse?
Well, because of a lot of the backlash to the terminology, I tend to I'm hoping that it will calm down a little bit, sort of turn up. But I tend to think of it as like an interconnected 3D spatial web, like with this incorporating all the different emerging technologies, that sort of fourth industrial revolution, incorporating them all together and interwoven. I usually do it through the lens of augmented reality or virtual reality. And that's sort of where I come from, of sort of like, if you experience it this way, looking at it in this particular way, then you get a sense of, what life will be like when you're not looking at sort of a 2D screen, but instead engaging and interacting. And the idea that it's not just in one particular space, but globally, that wherever you go, that you can experience this and pull it up. And you have to do it with AI. That's like, you can't do it like separate and apart from that. So and so there's that Venn diagram, they overlap quite a lot. It just depends on what kind of experiences that you're
Well,
looking
look,
for.
I'd be interested in your thoughts on that. I mean, we've seen all the headlines. The metaverse is dead. AI is the new thing in town. Or Zuckerberg has gone from away from the metaverse. He's now in AI. Or others are saying no, actually, he's now embedding AI in the metaverse. I mean, when you think about this, I mean, is the metaverse in your mind dead, or is it still evolving?
Well, a lot of the confusion, I think, was when people use the term metaverse, they tend to think of it as like a 2D interactive gaming platform. And I said, so that to me is yes, it's hints of what that kind of 3D spatialized computing will be like, but it's still a flat kind of interaction. It's not using that object recognition. It's not integrating all of where they talk about Internet of Things. It's not. So you get a sense, but are we as a as a just global society going to immediately go, yes, we're all going to get into the socialized gaming 2D space? Well, we already sort of do on gaming platforms. So, that's like, okay, let's recreate gaming platform. No, this is a new way of interacting, a new way of experiencing the world, of which it happens already in certain places, especially on the like enterprise and industrial space. At least in a individual location, it's starting to happen. Just like computers, came into our offices, and we started to experience it in our offices, and then at home, and then the internet became sort of widely distributed. This kind of spatial computing has begun in begun to appear across different industries and different use cases, but not completely integrated across the world.
I mean, there seems to be a split of opinion in terms of, there's some arguing, well, it's the industrial metaverse, the omniverse, the consumer metaverse is dead. And then on the other side, you say, well, actually, all the consumer brands are sort of saying, no, the metaverse is not dead, because there's all these people, interacting with each other in this world. I think it's something like 3.2 billion gamers in the world. And this is just a layer onto a world that they're used to interacting with people in a digital world, but it's just bringing it to the next level. So, where will the battle lines be drawn, and where do you think it will end up?
Well, that's where I think that, there's a lot of, at least in my sort of peer group, like discussion of like, is it the consumer metaverse, or is it the, industrial metaverse? Is it the enterprise metaverse? It's all the same. It's like, we don't necessarily subdivide the internet in that way. So it's, yes, we'll experience it individually, almost like when you have an intranet within your organization. But ultimately, it's this sort of future state of things. And so we're on the journey of figuring out how all of this gets interwoven. It's not the concept of creating a new social space where everybody interacts on a 2D level was 100% overhyped. And so we're coming down from the hype of that. But all of that is not going away. That just is one approach to the future of computing.
Yeah. Sam, when did you release the book? What was the day? Was it must be a year now?
In February.
February. Okay. And a question for you, because I know, and in fairness, you did call it out. You said, well, when Apple come along, they probably won't call it the metaverse, and they didn't, right? They called it spatial computing or something like that. So, what has surprised you most in terms of the period since you've launched the book, and what's happened in the marketplace?
Well, I probably wouldn't have called it the title that we have it if we knew that there was going to be such a backlash to the term. But I think seeing Apple's launch got me more excited than I ever anticipated about how they were kind of integrating all these technologies and pushing the like innovation further.
Yeah.
I didn't expect, I think most people didn't expect AI to sort of take off to the degree that it did in terms of consumer adoption of, Chat GPT, and for people to say, okay, well, it's one or the other. It's the metaverse or AI. Like whereas like, wait a second, the metaverse and AI are overlapping in part and parcel of. I mean, there's examples that are separate apart. And what I'm kind of liking now is I feel like we're just like even today and in the past week, starting to be, really going, how does this work? Where is the future of computing going? Because AI is not going to answer everything for everyone at all times, and neither is, these sort of flat 2D, gaming platforms are not going to answer all of our future understanding of what it is to be, in computing. And so you go, okay, well, what happens if, and I kind of like that. It feels like we're over that hype cycle and now kind of going up to that plateau of like, we're going to get business done. Now we're going to figure out where it applies, and we're in the middle of sort of that shakeout of a lot of companies going like, okay, well, we staffed up, now we're gonna lay off, and then they're starting to hire again, which is, I guess that kind of happens with emerging tech, kind of unfortunately, although the hype cycles can be fun at times.
Well, it can, but you see, I think, and look, you correct me if I got this wrong, but I think the fact that anyone with internet access could trial generative AI made it very easy for people to adopt. But actually, to experience, the metaverse, there's a sense where you need to buy the big headset. I have one here. You need to buy the big goggles, whatever, and that's expensive. Therefore, it actually can create a divide in the marketplace. So you'll have people who can afford to buy it and people who can't, and therefore the adoption is never going to be as quick. But I think AI ultimately is going to have a symbiotic relationship with this, because one of the things you bring out in the book, and I'd be interested in your thoughts in terms of, you talk about actually really what we're in is a building phase where you got all of these technologies coming together and building on each other and enabling each other and whatnot. And you call out loads and loads of technologies, because I think what you're saying in the book is, metaverse, that might have been a term to describe, help us describe something. But really, actually, it's about the confluence of technologies that are changing how we experience the internet and the physical and digital world.
Yeah, I think so. And the other thing is to not forget augmented reality, and augmented reality, not necessarily in terms of just, the wearing of glasses, which I think is coming to some degree, but you can already experience quite a lot of augmented reality on your phone, and in cars. And so there's this sense of, it's going to be this obvious shift. One day we're not in the metaverse, and the next day we are in this kind of metaverse world. And no, it really is how it interweaves together, and certain things are going to happen over time. And I tend to like to get, well, how do you be more innovative? How do you integrate these things? It was like, okay, well, take one of the technologies, whatever it might be, even if you're like, okay, we have to be involved in AI in some degree, of which there are so many different kinds of AI and so many different ways of doing that. But you go, okay, we're going to take this technology, and what if we added one more? Like, what if we took another one and applied it as well? And then by kind of doing that, you're advancing your way towards this kind of future state of the metaverse, or 3D spatial computing, globally connected, whatever you want to call it.
Yeah.
And we're all kind of a part of it. It's just you as a, you don't want to be the company, the business leader that says we don't need to have a web page when that future of the internet was starting. They're like, this is not going to be important. Instead, no, you got to try it. You got to kind of figure out what works now for your company and what's going to be working as the technology advances. I think that nobody expected the integration of AI to happen so quickly. And now there's a lot of regulations, a lot of movement to try to cull that. And people are trying to use it and then going, oh, it doesn't work perfectly. And I'm like, yeah, of course it doesn't work perfectly. It's not a completely formed technology yet. Everybody's sort of been brought into that diffusion of innovations. Everybody's been brought into that early adopter segment of the population all at once. So it's, you know, it's still fun and interesting, all of these technologies, and you just have to have that kind of growth mindset of trying to learn more about it. And hopefully, you know, the goal of the book is to say, well, you can sort of accelerate that by reading the book and understanding the technologies and understanding the application to industry, and then understanding where it could go wrong.
Yeah, and the book, look, I mean, this has been the way of innovation all over the years. But I mean, the book calls out, 5G, 6G, IoT, edge, cloud, blockchain, crypto, haptics, computer vision, machine learning, conversational
Just a few things.
and they're all just building blocks that are coming together, which is creating this world, as we said at the outset, that is still evolving, and we're still not sure what it might look like. Now, in the book, you also gave a real interesting breakdown between how the internet itself has evolved from Web 1, Web 2, Web 3.0, and then distinguishing between that and Web 3 and semantic web and spatial web. So there's a lot in there. What is your take on all of this?
Well, I think that it's this, again, it's for me going back to that kind of sense making of, if it doesn't make sense to me, then I'm like, would probably just go like, I have other things to do. Like, but if I were like executive at any business, to me, I go, that doesn't make sense. How can I make sense of it? And how can I help other people make sense of it? And when people talk about Web3, they think that they're talking about the metaverse, and when they think talking about the metaverse, they're talking about Web3, and they really are different approaches. I'm under my particular approach, I hope simplifies it for most people, of having it be kind of that umbrella term for all of this. Web3's much more about that belief in decentralization being the future, and I feel like there's going to be a mix of both, of kind of centralized technology and decentralized technology, because you can't kind of go to the extremes.
No.
Although that, and so Web3 is about ownership of different assets and how you decentralize it sort of away from a certain authority, whereas the centralization, you kind of need some of that in order to build out the infrastructure and interconnectedness that is necessary for this future of spatialized computing.
Yeah, and look, I mean, my own sense would be, look, Web3, as in decentralized web, is kind of more like an ideology at this point in time. Like, it might be great. I do think you call it out, though, in terms of, you sort of say, well, look, the incumbents, they have their walled gardens. Sometimes they can serve a purpose in terms of it's efficient and all that sort of stuff, but we know they use our data and have our data. You also say, though, actually, it would be preferable that the web is kind of more open and not necessarily controlled by just a few. And I suppose, well, it's anyone's guess as to where we end up, because I'm sure all the gaming companies are equally sort of saying, well, we could be the people who are at the center of this.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's where, how much of a push is it for even like the gaming companies to go like, how innovative do they need to be as it relates to the future of computing? they're focusing on much more on the gaming aspect of it than they are of like, what is the future of interaction? Although, there are a couple of exceptions to that rule. For me, I love Roblox, and Roblox isn't always the most advanced technologically, but it does offer, I like to use it as kind of my example of different way of creating an ecosystem. And but and I love some of the stuff that Niantic is doing in terms of trying to gamify the outdoors.
Yeah.
They're sort of in that kind of nice nice way of like that I tend to use as examples, but it's like, what is it like when you have a consumer based augmented reality application there, and Snapchat too. So there are larger companies that are doing this, that are sort of working their way towards this future state. I think that it's just, it's not everybody yet.
Did I read somewhere, Sam, that 70% of 13-year-olds in the United States use Roblox?
I think it might be more than that. It is like everyone, and
Right, okay.
and so it might have gone down a little bit recently, but yeah, there's a handful of companies that I personally like to follow and sort of see where they're going, and the choices that they make. I mean, Nvidia is another one that I like to follow, and sort of see where they go, as well, in terms of thinking about what is spatialized computing and what does that mean. And they might not always call it that, but but I'm constantly inspired by what they do.
Yeah, but look, one of the things you talk about in the book is the creator economy, and as I understand in Roblox, there are 200 times more, fashion designers in Roblox than there are in the world. So you have all these kids who are, designing, clothes and gear for their avatars and whatnot, and on one level, that's a fantastic skill for the future, right? We see a world that's going to be very different, but this whole creator economy, because of one of the issues I think with the internet. And look, I started to work, the internet didn't exist. And I actually, I will often make this point that, in most organizations, the board and the executive were born before the internet and the smartphone. And that's why, sense making is so
not
important.
Anymore. I mean, not like that's the thing that's sort of funny, right? Is that we couldn't have looked at the internet and said, when the internet was growing, we could be like, what is it going to be like when our entire lives are changed? And instead we are like, well, we saw how the world changed with mobile computing. We saw the world change with internet. Now we can sort of go, well, this is kind of, where it might go. And that it's like, we have to remember that, like, even if you don't know the future, you can sort of look a little bit to the past of where things have gone wrong, or where things might go right. The creator economy, I mean, I love the there was a whole Roblox fashion report talking about.
I read it actually, yeah.
It's lovely. They're coming out with another one, but I just like that, the potential for creating assets that people can buy and use. And right now it's much more in like gaming skins, right, than it is in terms of when you have a mapped 3D world that everybody has access to. Who knows what kind of new businesses could be created, right? If you're always wearing augmented reality glasses, then the overlays, you could choose overlays for your home, or the inside of your home, and somebody could create that kind of business. And that is a business that didn't necessarily exist before, but it can be one that is developed that we wouldn't have necessarily imagined, even 10, 20 years ago. But you do have to, you would have to think about it. The furniture makers go, not only are we going to offer you the location how big is this couch going to look like in your room, but like, what is it going to look like when you put your glasses on?
Yeah.
And how does that change?
Yeah.
Those that kind of experience is very different. That is not necessarily, take ChatGPT and try to imagine what the future is. This is a different kind of discussion.
But isn't that the beauty of all this, in terms of we are finding new ways to interact and do things for our customers? And I think one of the points you really bring out in the book is that, the data, I think you describe data as the new oxygen, but you also talk about the fact, okay, we've challenges in terms of privacy and protection and all those sort of things, but we've huge challenges in terms of, well, how do you put all this data together and make sense of it?
Yeah, I mean, that was one of the funny things of putting together the book, with Luis, that I do like to try to simplify really highly complex concepts and ideas. And I remember I was like, I think I probably went on a walk or something, and I came back and I was like, Luis, it's all about data. He's like, what do you mean? And I was like, it's how you take it in, it's how you put it out, it's like how you gather it, where you use it. And it sounds like, in retrospect, it's like, well, of course, like, but it wasn't necessarily something that had been written in articles or books that we had read as it relates to all of these, all of the computing. But if you simplify it to that, and you start saying, well, if you're going to have to process this amount of data, you're going to have to go like, well, if you're going to have to gather the amount of data, what are the kinds of industries that really helps and supports? Like, where are you going to store all of that? Where are you going to, and so it ends up being like, well, you need 6G. Well, you need cloud computing. Well, you're going to need, not only just the hardware, but all these things. Even if you just go, how am I going to map my particular room, which brings up whole other issues of data privacy as well. But what needs to come together to make that experience? What needs to come together to make the experience of you walk down the street, and it's not just, to be very American about it, 50% off on the pizza slice, insert whatever 50% off whatever local delicacy you happen to have. Like, how can you make it more engaging, more useful? And so many technologies have to do that, and all of them are sort of gathering, processing, using, understanding all of the data, and then add to it, if you and I were walking down the street and we ran into each other, all of your information and my information has to be filtered, as well, so that I get the right information, at the right time in the right place, to be very marketing and advertising about it. But I have to be able to understand what information I would want to know, or my wearables would need to know that to be able to serve that to me directly. And that's, I don't remember if you were like the beginning of search technology, right? The beginning, like prior to Google, it was just kind of really chaotic. And I think that kind of experience, it's going to be weird and chaotic and feel off for a little while, until it just becomes, something we're kind of used to, which has happened with search.
Yeah, because you do talk about it in the book, and sort of you make that point that, look, search was very clunky, and then it became simplified. How is search in the metaverse ever going to be simplified? I suppose it's $1 million.
I mean, I think that's when you start getting into like, well, then you bring in, AI, and you bring in, what is the future of quantum? I mean, that's the next one people are going to be talking about for sure, because it needs to be as real time as possible.
Yeah.
And it needs to be trained on your own individual data, right? Right now, we're talking very much about, or it feels like the industry is talking about, like, large language models, sort of scraping the internet for information. It feels like we're moving towards, well, what if you use the information that's within your own company and within your own organization, and then it gets to, what if you're only building off your own data, your own personal data, and training of your own personal data? And that that's something that I guess we've seen a little bit, right? When you search the internet, but we haven't seen it to the scale yet that all these kind of spatialized computing gets us to, and that's where it's going to go sort of wrong, like potentially very, very quickly. I tried to say like, just even going through that model of like grocery shopping, and how many ads do you want to be served while you're going grocery shopping? We've seen that kind of those videos of where it goes wrong, or what kind of ads do you want to be served in your kitchen? Yeah. Maybe things that are differently presented. So how to experience that world? I mean, I think that most people, when I teach like students, or usually if I do talks, most of the time the audience is very much not technically savvy. There are exceptions to that, and when you start thinking about how you will experience that kind of 3D spatialized computing, experience this metaverse, and even if you don't know the technology behind it for sure, you can start to understand how it will change your day-to-day lives and how it will change your business. And then you go, okay, now that I kind of understand and can picture it, what happens first, and where does it apply to my particular, my particular company? And what do we have to worry about sort of going forward? That part to me is actually my favorite part of doing talks or talking to people or teaching, is that moment of kind of clarity of even if you don't understand the tech, if you understand the concepts, that you can start influencing so much more than you thought, going into it, to be like, I don't know, I don't even know what this is. And then they're like, oh, so you mean we're going to be able to do this? Yes. Yeah. We're going to be able to do this. Yes. Like, oh, we're going to have to worry about this now. And I'm like, yes. And then I'm like, God, I did my job.
No, I'm totally with you on that. I mean, I'm not a technologist by background, but it is very much in terms of, well, what are the implications of this, and what does it mean in terms of our customers and the outcomes that it might bring about? Now, one of the things you do talk about, though, is that you say, well, look, companies are used to collecting all sort of data on customers in the real world, right? In the physical world, right? But suddenly, as things evolve and as things progress, they're going to have, real world or physical world data. They're going to have virtual world data. They're going to have digital world data. But actually, they're not set up for that. So there's going to be a real challenge in terms of trying to understand how our customers are engaging with us and all that sort of stuff. And how do we overcome that?
There's a little bit of it that has already happened to a degree of, if you think about just the retail sector and how they're like, well, we're going to have our physical store, the brick and mortar, we're going to have our digital, presence, we're going to have our mobile presence. There's already sort of multiple touch points, and you go, what is your user experience and how are they all interconnected? And so now you're adding even kind of more, what probably you were like, more platforms, although they're even more interconnected. It becomes one experience as opposed to individual ones. And you go, okay, well, how are you going to integrate, virtual try-ons using like individual body maps? And how are we going to, as a retailer, are we going to keep that data information? Or are we going to make sure that kind of more decentralized approach of like that person, when they scan themselves, owns their own data? Probably not. It's probably going to be whoever scans it that's going to own it. But I think that, I mean, ultimately, with a lot of this, we don't know. I just tend to go back to that individual customer experience over and over again of like, what are they going to want? And so usually, one of the one of the things to harken back to sort of your data question, I just said that I could imagine that executives are going to go like, well, now we're going to be able to get this data, this data, this data, all this data. And it was like, don't just say, let's gather it all. Let's just take it all, right? To use the example of a customer, that retail customer who's going to scan their body, maybe we don't keep that data. Maybe that's not information that we store somewhere, or maybe it's not personally connected to that profile, or if there's some kind of way to allow that particular customer to own that data, because that is a scan of themselves. And I think that overall, as kind of a society, we've just said, yes, let's take all the data. Let's just take it and manage it. And I think it's going to be so much more than we've ever had before, and so much more personalized, identifiable, and have chance for, you know, kind of bad actors, as they like to say, to take advantage and use that. And we see a little bit of that with AI. And one of the things that gets me scared a bit, having done my avatars and virtual beings class, is learning more and more about the technology and how easy it is to kind of recreate even like your voice. Yeah. And what implications that have. And then you're going to be able to recreate somebody's face, you're going to be able to recreate their body movements, and then you start getting into this like, what is real now, and get very philosophical very quickly. But the simplified way of it for me is like, even if you can get all of that data, think about what kind do you need, and what kind would be appropriate to take from a user perspective.
Yeah. Now, in the book, you talk about, you know, digital twins, and say actually with this digital twins are humans, and then you talk about avatars, and you actually talk about actually for a lot of people their digital avatar is more important than their physical self. You know, what's going on there, and where do you see that moving to?
I love this topic so much. My classes, so I do like to like weird people out with this topic, because people haven't really, I guess, analyzed it in as much detail as I have. But so first, when I talk about avatars, I usually what I refer to is like a representation of yourself, like of an actual person. When I talk about virtual beings, it is there's not a physical version. It's something that has been created. So the simplified one would be like a chat bot, or you know, an Alexa kind of back and forth. It is a computer program, and now those computer programs are starting to have, you know, they're starting to look more and more human, and act more and more human with the technology becoming more advanced. And so in terms of the importance of avatars, I think we were already just talking about that entire creator economy that you were saying, of people just spending so much money for their digital representation of themselves. And I think that it is interconnected so much. What there's not that kind of hard line for this next generation. People have like, there's my physical self, and then there's my digital self, and it's like, no, they're all the same. They're all integrated. If we go back to retail, and you say like the experience of the store and the physical world, and experience of the store online, to a customer, it's the same. It's not, you know, to the person creating it, it is different. To the outside world, they're all integrated. So figuring out and understanding how to understanding that a person's physical representation of themselves and the digital representation of themselves are the same. You know, it's just it's a different approach. It's a different like perspective, but they need to be kind of respected that way. You wouldn't be spending digital currency on digital goods if they didn't think that it was as valuable as physical currency and physical goods. I like the back and forth, right? I mean, I am excited when I see now sort of digital experience or digital goods turning into physical goods, like that kind of thing. I think will happen more and more. And then how do you integrate and go back and forth so that it's just kind of seamless? Because that's where we're going.
Now, one of the things you do say in the book, though, is say that actually we might have several avatars depending on our social setting. So I might have one for work, or I might have one for meeting my friends, or one for my sports or whatever. So these are all just ways of expressing ourselves, I presume, given the context or wherever we might be. Yeah.
Right. I mean, it depends on how broadly you want to define avatars, right? And some people define it really broadly and say the picture you have on LinkedIn, they might say that is your avatar. I'm not quite that broad on it, but if you do even just think of it as the way that you represent yourself on LinkedIn versus on YouTube versus, in the office versus at home, you are sort of slightly adjusting the way that you act to each situation. And so if you were represented in each of them in a digital form, like an avatar graphic form, that you might say, well, I'm gonna, wear this outfit in this situation. I'm gonna represent myself not as a human, but as some other kind of being in that situation, and customize each for each way. I mean, we're starting to see that a bit with, there's just starting to be the hints of creating kind of a digital twin of yourself that gets to go off and, have the phone calls that are the really boring phone calls waiting online for something, and just be like, when the bot answers the phone, my bot is gonna, respond and send me that information. That's sort of that future hopeful state of we get to spend less time on the kind of boring stuff and more on the human creativity. So I just, I think that understanding and believing and respecting each version of how you're representing yourself and thinking of it as they're all kind of equally valid to that person is probably the best approach, and that it's going to be more important, especially for young. I mean, think about the generation that spent like 2 years online.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
And so for them, as they become, business owners, like their avatars were kind of their representation of themselves as they grew up. And so it's kind of unavoidable that becomes more and more important.
There was a piece in the book where you talked about embodiment, presence, and identity, which I thought was very fascinating in terms of there's a whole different way of thinking about this.
Yeah, I'd love to think that. I mean, there's so much of it is, I said, due to a lot of the work from Jeremy Bailenson and the Stanford Computer Interaction Lab. I was a psychology major undergrad, and so I tend to keep on pushing to the why are we experiencing something? What makes it feel more real? What is it that sort of changes our own individual experiences, these technologies? And I think it's sort of fun even to like spend time with like some gamers and younger gamers and sort of seeing how they play these games and how they feel that they are there, in a way that, and VR, which is, one of my loves for sure, that people will talk about, oh, you put on the VR headset and you feel like you're there, and you look around and your whole body is confused and going like, am I on the African savannah or am I not there? They're like, I am. No, I'm not. I am. No, I'm not. I love that kind of like trick. You feel haptics and like, am I feeling this thing or am I not feeling this? Like, oh, well, it is that there is so much time spent in gaming worlds that I think that probably if they did brain scans of the people in VR versus brain scans of like heavy gamers that are always, that they'll probably be pretty matched up of feeling that they're there. But there's always kind of I think we get more and more immersed in these technologies, we're going to really have a difficult time understanding the difference between, is it like the real world and digital world? They're kind of the same. And that brings up a lot of issues for policy and safety, and brings up a lot of opportunities for businesses, and kind of changes the way that different people are going to be interacting. It it was an entire journey in and of itself, into this future metaverse world with Luis as we wrote it.
Yeah, I mean, I often think in terms of, like, I have the Oculus Quest 2 there, and I often think, in 10 years' time, we look back and say, oh, that was so naff. But actually,
look at one versus the other, the 1 versus 2, and the first one I was like, you don't even have trailers, like you can't even experience this, and then now it's like, oh, this is pretty decent,
So I think it'll get better and better and better, and all these technologies, as you were saying earlier, they'll all keep enhancing each other and getting faster and more, more persistent in real time and everything else. Yeah, on the psychology thing, one thing that you said in the books, which was really interesting, was that in terms of learning, and the neuroscience, you kind of said that actually, and even in terms of dealing with issues, that people are more than happy to learn from digital humans, or to get counseled, because it's I suppose it's probably safer in some respects.
It's non-judgmental. I mean, that's the thing,
okay.
is that I think that people who are like, I can talk back and forth with a bot of some sort, this sort of virtual being, that they are more willing to share sort of the intimate details of their life. I mean, you could think of it as almost like the children who had the dolls. They just like you could play with the dolls and watch children play with the dolls, and then you get all this sort of storyline about what's happened. Now, from an adult standpoint, it's that if you're in this world and nobody else is there and nobody's going to judge you, then you can kind of share things more intimately with a digital being therapist than you would in real life. Now, I wouldn't say, I don't think that is going to change the future of therapy so that there's no people anymore. It's only about, like, no, but I do think that my guess is there's going to be probably more accountability and more detailed kind of ongoing experiences. So I'm making this out. I like to go and kind of make things. So maybe you go to see your therapist once a week, but then you go to see your therapist bot, like, over time, and other days, to sort of follow up, and then a recap of those kind of conversations sent to it'd be like, oh, so these kinds of things came up in your sessions with my digital twin therapist. Should we go over this? And it becomes more personalized, but it also becomes more ongoing. I think that these kinds of solutions are not very far-fetched. They're not. There's things that we can potentially see in our lifetime, but right now we're all kind of like, ChatGPT is changing everything. It's like, no, it's changed a lot of things. But having that virtual being therapist that is the digital twin of your real therapist in your room, that is, taking notes and going back and forth, that perhaps that ends up being the future of psychology.
Well, I did see somewhere, Sam, where some companies are using now, they're using the metaverse for basically empathy training. So the person gives feedback, and then their role gets reversed, and now they're receiving the feedback.
I mean, that's been when VR first out, is like the kind of empathy machine was what it was called, right? And then it does that. It doesn't do that. I think, you could get in a lot of debates with people about whether it is an empathy machine. I think for me, one of the kind of basics of some of these technologies is the simulation of other spaces, right? For training. And NVIDIA uses it, for training of robots and like other and shows how you can do, millions and millions of variations on it. But for even the training of individuals, that if you feel like I'm going to be so nervous about this public speaking experience, that you can go into a virtual world and practice the public speaking. I'm very nervous about this kind of situation. You can recreate it. All of those, even I like to use the oil rig as an example of like training for the oil rig ahead of time. Training for emergency situations ahead of time, so that you feel enough that you're there, so that you get that kind of muscle memory. You get to so that you're much more automatic in your reaction to when you have the real world situation. And that kind of simulations has existed, for a long time. It just ended up being sort of training rooms and screens, and now it's that more immersive embodiment and kinesthetic learning that's happening in a broader way.
Yeah, I think there's huge opportunities for training and education, and I think even the book you talk about is the fact that post purchase you can have your instruction manual there, you can fix the things yourself, all that sort of stuff. So I think there's huge opportunities. Now, can we talk about maybe some of the challenges? And you call out a load of challenges around interoperability, persistency, latency, all those type of things. What are the big ones that we need to get right?
I think that for a lot of it is looking at what did we get wrong at the internet, and then say, let's apply those again. I said to somebody once, like, I looked just, I guess to harken back to psychology, is that I looked at what do us as humans do wrong over and over again. Where they're like, what's the 10 things that humans do? Like lie, cheat, steal, blah, blah, blah. And it maps perfectly to the internet. It's like, okay, well, where are the opportunities for those things to happen again in this kind of future metaverse? Let's not assume that it's this idealized state. Let's look at it and say, I remember in writing the book that I looked at, like, where was the start of the dark web? And I was like, there could be an immersive, sort of a metaverse dark web. Why couldn't there be? How could we make sure that if we knew that happened before, how can we stop that from happening, again? And instead of assuming that humans are always going to be nice to each other under all circumstances, that we go in and we say, probably we won't. Let's be hopeful, but let's prepare for when we don't. And I guess, so that's kind of why I think about, if the technology companies, or these large technology companies that already know so much about us from our internet searches and from our social media, now have access to what our homes look like, and what our individual rooms look like, and what's in our refrigerator, what who our friends are, what their faces are, be able to understand the interconnection, see where we're walking all the time, which it already does from a certain wearable sensors. If they know our entire lives, then how should that kind of change how should that change the way that we interact with these companies? Like, what should they be allowed that information, because they're going to have access to it sort of almost whether we like it or not. We're gonna, there's another scroll down of like, yes, I will have I'll give you the right to understand and see all this. Even, sorry, to give like one specific information, bit of information that I covered in avatars and virtual beings, is even if you look at eye tracking, just look at eye tracking. Eye tracking is already something that we sort of toggle and say, sure, you have eye tracking. But if you look at how much information from eye tracking is given to the company that is tracking it, that you're like, wait a second, it understands where you're looking, it understands sentiment from, eye dilation, it would understand what you're looking at and be able to map where you look. And you go, I just gave that information away. And the thing is that what, usually when I bring that up, people go, well, did you do it? And I'm like, yes, I did. Like, because there's really kind of not a lot of, if you want the good experience, then you give up that information. This is where you start getting into, you need, kind of government policy. You need some certain like overall of like, should the companies themselves be able to have access to all that information, and what is the right way for them to use it? And I overheard I didn't overhear. I was listening to a podcast with Sam Altman from OpenAI, and he's like, well, I'm not going to do anything bad with all this information that I get from AI. And then the person's like, I'm not worried about you like doing anything bad. I'm worried about all of the other companies that are out there that will exist. Even the cover of like Wired magazine was like, to our AI overlords, please don't bleep this up. There's so much that can go wrong in the next 5-10 years. I mean, there are always things that can go wrong, but if it's the way I tend to think about it now, and this is sort of post book, is that all these technologies are kind of invading our own personal spaces in a way maybe they hadn't before. And so if you're doing that, how much rights do you want over your own personal data, and how much access should these technology companies have, just in general? And I don't think we have the answer to that, because it's going to vary. This is what the overwhelming thing of creating a book that's about all these technologies globally and predicting the future, is that there's so many, well, it depends kind of answers, because it's going to depend on what country you're using, it's depend on what technology you're using. But that's why I guess I always go back to the individual personal experience of this. And what you would want for yourself, what you would want for your family, can at least be initial guidance in combination with sort of what's happened before, with the internet and with mobile computing. I don't know if that answered your question.
No, absolutely.
I kind of meandered a bit there.
In fact, one of the things you do call out in the book, which I thought was really, really well made, a point was around, actually, this is a societal transformation. And, we didn't realize, the internet until it had happened. We didn't realize the mobile phone till it happened. This is happening, and it might happen fast, it might happen slow, whatever, but it's happening, and we won't actually realize it's happened till it's happened. And I think, that's a great point. Is maybe, bring us to a close, and, maybe throw the floor to you in terms of any closing thoughts in terms of, where you think we might end up.
Yeah, I mean, I actually am going I joined the World Economic Forum Futures Council for the Metaverse, and we're having a meeting in a couple weeks in Dubai, where it's like all these countries go together. And so for me, I feel like I'm excited to sort of see all these different perspectives in physical reality, and you kind of where we're going, because there's everybody has their own biases, and I try to avoid mine as much as possible, but you can't help it. I mean, I think that the as you said, like, the future is coming, and you don't want to avoid it, but you just gotta go in and try these technologies and see what it means and how it changes, and where the issues are. And maybe you thought it could help in this way in your business, and then ends up it can't. And that's just kind of the way that it is, the way that these technologies were built, right? You go the internet 1.0, 2.0, 3.0, like we're kind of living the change as it happens. I don't think that even everybody was thinking about like pre-Zoom meetings to post, Zoom meetings, you're like, it works, but it doesn't quite work, and you go, okay, well, what if you could feel that you're there? Well, that changes kind of the dynamic. I love helping people to understand these technologies. I mean, I get to do that every week in my class. I'm hoping that the book gets to do that whenever I get the opportunity to speak. I sort of jump at the chance, and especially if it's like, even when it's about like, oh, talk about this particular industry. I went to my high school reunion, and I talked about like what my high school might be in 25 years. That ends up being like, what is education? I did another one on fashion. I did, I like to look at it sort of across industries, because I do think the more and more that you look at it beyond this kind of intangible future state of integrating all these technology, and then you sort of go, well, my favorite two questions are the so what, who cares? And I like to answer them. It's like, well, for you and your role in your particular company, this is how it might apply. And then you get them to think about what that feature is. So yeah, I just love I love all this, and I'm
well,
so
your enthusiasm
that
is
you let
infectious.
me come onto your
No. And look, yeah, the book is great, and I'm sure everyone who listens to this will have got loads out of it as well. So, Sam, really want to thank you. Well, where can people reach you?
LinkedIn is a great place to do that. I also have my own website, which is the Samantha G Wolfe with the e.com, and my company website, which is we are PitchFWD, so it's PitchFWD.com. And yeah, or probably see me at a tech event and come over and say
or see you in the metaverse.
Yes, exactly.
Sam, it's been a pleasure. So I want to thank you so much on behalf of everyone here. I want to thank the Digital Transformation Lab, and I want to thank Cork University Business School for all their support. And I want to thank our audience. But it's been a blast, Sam. Thank you so much. And best of luck in Dubai, and best of luck with the next book.
Yes, thank you so much.